The jury exchanged direct.
Senator Bob Dole, a former political opponent, got out of his wheelchair and saluted the casket. I mean, that really speaks to this powerful moment for our country to come together.
Really a remarkable moment there. It is Wednesday, December 5th, and this is Fox and Friends First. Happening right now at 4 a.m. here on the East Coast. A Fox News alert for you. That salute now ingrained as one of the most powerful political moments in many of our lifetimes, as we are live as the nation gets ready to say their final farewells to President George H.W. Bush today. Also calling for leniency, Robert Mueller now recommending no prison time for General Michael Flynn. This broke overnight, but is that new memo really a smoking gun in the Russia collusion case? How the president's legal team is firing back. And fiery protests still watching Fox and Friends First on this Wednesday morning. I'm Heather Childers. Thank you, as always, for starting your day with us. Today, on this day, we honor the life of President George H.W. Bush on this National Day of Mourning. In just a few hours, President Trump and First Lady Melania will attend his state funeral and join the nation as we say goodbye to our 41st president. Ellison Barber is live for us in Washington with more on today's touching tributes. Good morning, Ellison.
Good morning, Heather. A spokesperson for the former president, the 41st president, says that when he was briefed on his funeral preparations back in 2011, George H.W. Bush asked if they thought anyone would come. People have come, and they have come in droves. They are still coming. The line outside of the Capitol building right now is hours long to get inside to pay respects to the 41st president. Politicians, celebrities, and regular people are all paying their respects to a man who gave so much to this country. Former Senator Bob Dole, a World War II veteran, rose up from his wheelchair to salute another member of the greatest generation.
What a powerful moment with Senator Bob Dole, a former political opponent, a great patriot himself who served in World War II, got out of his wheelchair and saluted the casket. I mean, that really speaks to this powerful moment for our country to come together despite our differences.
Former President Bush has been lying in state at the Capitol since Monday. His casket will leave here a little later this morning around 10 o'clock. A motorcade will carry the former president to the National Cathedral. President Trump is set to attend the funeral, as is the Prince of Wales and all living former U.S. presidents. Mr. Bush's son, former President George W. Bush, is set to speak after the service at the National Cathedral. The casket of the 41st president will travel to Joint Base Andrews and depart for Houston, Texas. He then lies in repose at St. Martin's Episcopal Cathedral, with the funeral taking place at that church tomorrow. His final resting place will be next to his wife, Barbara, and their daughter, Robin, on the grounds of Texas A&M behind the presidential library that bears his name.
I'd say two things really gave him purpose. One was giving back to others. Family mattered. This is a time to celebrate George H.W. Bush, not to grieve his loss, and that's what we're doing as a family right now.
The Bush family stayed at the Blair House. President Trump and the First Lady visited them there. Mrs. Trump invited former First Lady Laura Bush and other members of the Bush family to the White House. They visited. Mrs. Bush posted a photo on Instagram saying that they were able to see some of the staff they used to work alongside. And then, of course, today, Heather, is a national day of mourning.
Yeah. Our special coverage, of course, beginning at 9 a.m. with Brett Baer and Martha McCallum here on Fox News. Thank you so much, Ellison. We appreciate it. Well, breaking overnight, huge story. Special counsel Robert Mueller recommending no prison time for Michael Flynn. The brand new memo explaining the former Trump advisor is providing substantial help. That's a quote. Leland Vittert is live in Washington as the Trump team rails against the investigation. Good morning, Leland. What's the latest?
Heather, good morning to you. This morning, we are also getting to look at some of the things Mike Flynn talked about to the special counsel, including his interactions with the Russian ambassador after the election, but before the inauguration, and also discussions about sanctions against Russia for their 2016 election interference and UN Security Council vote against Israel. Because of his cooperation, Mueller's teams wrote, and here is the quote, given the defendant's substantial assistance and other considerations set forth below, a sentence at the low end of the guideline range, including a sentence that does not impose a term of incarceration, is appropriate and warranted. Of course, both sides view this as just another piece of incontrovertible proof that they have been right all along. From Democrat, the recommendation of no jail time for Flynn, apart from its obvious irony for the man who led chants of lock her up, reflects both the timeliness and significance of his help. That most of the details are redacted signals he has given far more than we or the president may know. On the other side, the president's lawyer equated this to a guilty plea for spitting on the sidewalk and said Mueller's team is, quote, overzealous, media-inspired prosecutors. They are sick puppies. We know Mueller can be very tough on those who cop pleas in return for cooperation. As you might remember, Heather, it was just last month he accused former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort of lying to him after a similar deal.
Yeah, and some more on that expected to come out by Friday. You know, I was looking at this. I would encourage everyone to read this. It's only 6 pages long, and the majority of it looks like this. So it won't take you long to get through. All right. Thank you so much, Leland.
Thanks, Heather.
Well, former Clinton advisor Mark Penn is also speaking out against the tactics used by Robert Mueller's team. He says that the Russia probe started as an insurance policy against President Trump's election and has spun completely out of control.
What I observe is that the independent counsel's office, instead of getting people to sing, is getting people to plead guilty to things so that they can build a circumstantial case against the president in a report, completely misusing the judicial process. If, in fact, General Flynn was colluding with the Russians, he wouldn't be getting no prison time. That means on its face he was not colluding with the Russians. We are here because an effort was begun to have an insurance policy against Donald Trump winning the presidency. And, you know, I spent a year fighting the independent counsel for President Clinton. I thought that was wrong. I thought this has been wrong from the beginning.
Well, Michael Flynn served as President Trump's national security advisor from January to February of 2017. Don't forget, before that, he worked for President Obama. We're going to talk more about that coming up. Well, a longtime ally of the president refusing to testify before the Senate about the Russia investigation. Roger Stone pleading the fifth and denying access to requested documents. Stone's lawyers say that the Senate judiciary requests are too overboard and overreaching. The special counsel investigation has called into question Stone's possible ties with WikiLeaks while he worked on the Trump campaign. And a Fox News alert for you, thousands of top Republican emails stolen in a massive hack during the midterms. Politico is reporting that criminals with the cybersecurity firm called CrowdStrike broke into email accounts of 4 top aides at the National Republican Congressional Committee. And the breach was first discovered in April. It sounds familiar. This is the same firm accused of hacking DNC servers back in 2016. Senator Chuck Grassley demanding answers about the FBI raid on a whistleblower. Last month, agents apparently showed up at FBI contractor Dennis Kane's home after he reportedly turned over documents related to the Clinton Foundation and the Uranium One deal. Remember that? Well, as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Grassley now wants to know why Kane was not protected as a whistleblower. So more to come on that story for sure. And let's take you to Wall Street now. Wall Street shuts down for a national day of mourning in honor of President George H.W. Bush. This comes one day after the Dow Jones Industrial Average sinks by nearly 800 points. Investors are nervous about a potential economic slowdown, and they're also, apparently, according to experts, nervous about uncertainty over a tariff war with China. The downturn marks the market's worst sell-off since October. Avoiding a shutdown showdown on Capitol Hill. Tomorrow, lawmakers are expected to vote on a short-term spending bill to keep the government running for another 2 weeks. They have until Friday at midnight to approve the extension. If passed, it would fund the government until December 21st. The House canceled all votes earlier this week because of the passing of President George H.W. Bush. And Take Two gearing up for a resupply mission today after mold delayed yesterday's launch. A scientist found the mold in food bars for mice as they loaded up the Dragon cargo capsule. They had to delay the launch to the International Space Station to replace them. Well, on Monday, SpaceX broke 4 records with a successful launch to take satellites to space. Today's launch would set a record for quickest turnaround between missions. Well, the time now is about 10 minutes after the top of the hour, and Robert Mueller recommending no jail time for Michael Flynn because of his cooperation in the Russia probe. But does this show any proof of collusion? Jim Hansen weighs in up next.
We can recognize that we have the most corrupt president in American history, who is a basic threat to our system. We have to act on that.
Well, you've heard him making these claims before. He spent a lot of money doing it and saying it. The mega donor Tom Steyer calling for President Trump's impeachment. But not all Democrats are on the same page. The top aide who says impeachment calls could spell big trouble come 2020. And saying the ex-Trump official gave substantial help to the feds. But does this new memo prove any collusion with Russia? Former Army Special Forces operator Jim Hansen here to weigh in. Jim, thank you very much for joining us. A lot of this big breaking news yesterday. What are your initial thoughts on it?
I think that what Flynn is involved in was a lot more about Flynn Turkey than Trump Russia. And I think we're going to find out this is just another in the long series of nothing burgers the left has gotten extremely excited about, hoping they were going to bring down Trump on non-existent collusion. Flynn's big problem was he and his son had a consulting firm that took a big pile of money from Turkey to do some sketchy things. And when that came to light and he didn't come clean about it, Mueller had leverage against him, and so he used that to get a guilty plea to lying under oath, and has used that as basically a way to intimidate other reluctant witnesses into talking to him.
What do you make of this? And I showed this earlier to everyone at home. You can print this out yourself. It's 6 pages long. The majority of it is redacted like this. This portion right here references this unknown criminal investigation. It also talks about, cooperating in terms of questions regarding the Russia collusion investigation and another investigation. What do you make of this criminal investigation that we don't know what this is?
I think that is much more likely to be related to the Turkey operations than it was to anything related to the transition or related to his talks with the Russians during the transition, because those were all things that the National Security Advisor for the president is perfectly authorized to do. So it was the lying under oath about that, and then the fact that Mueller had leverage on him due to the nature, more likely, of what he was doing or had promised to do for Turkey, because I don't even think they delivered the work. So it was a lot more intimidation and bullying by Mueller that was enabled him to make this into something.
Well, Rudy Giuliani, he agrees with you. Here's what he had to say, always kind of colorful. He likened the offense in the Flynn with major repercussions for many. And he said that there was nothing in the sentencing memo to suggest collusion, which it doesn't. And as you said, he says the Mueller team has been overzealous once again, and the left overzealous in looking at this report and this memo as it came out.
And if that's the case, as usual, again, we're going to have a whole lot of, fire and fury from the left and the Democrats and the media trying to make this into, oh, my God, Trump's going down. We finally caught him. And I don't think they caught him, because I don't think there was anything that is collusion in a sense that normal people think of.
And this is the thing I've been thinking all along. If there was collusion with all of the leaks that have come out and continue to come out and will come out today in regards to what all of this redacted information is, if there was anything specifically tied to collusion, don't you think that would be leaked?
I'm pretty sure the New York Times headline would be running that instead of the fact that it's all redacted. There's no there. And again, Trump now is going to have to face more of these accusations, but Flynn is not going to jail, which is probably correct. And whatever information he gave probably helped Mueller's ability to intimidate other witnesses a lot more than it did to actually hurt Trump.
Yeah, and he worked for President Obama for a long time, much longer than he worked for President Trump. So there's that. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it as always.
Good to be with you, Heather.
Have a good day. Well, the time now is about 18 minutes after the top of the hour. Members of the migrant caravan caught trying to sneak into onto American soil. The brand new order at the border from Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis. And apparently, President Bush's dog Sully is a, quote, waste of your emotional energy. That outrageous article sparking major backlash online. Your comments pouring in on this one. Extending their presence at the U.S.-Mexico border until the end of January. Todd Pyrer is live for us as Democrats push a controversial security plan. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning to you, Heather. The caravan crisis keeping more of those who serve away from their families this Christmas on the heels of more scenes like this. Continued breaches of the U.S. border prompting Defense Secretary Jim Mattis to issue this statement. Quote, the Secretary of Defense has approved an extension of the ongoing Department of Defense support to the Department of Homeland Security response to migrant caravan arrivals. DoD support to DHS is authorized until January 31st, 2019. You can see here Customs and Border Patrol holding a readiness drill, ramping up its response to the crisis. Their orders will continue to involve installing and repairing wire barriers and providing security and transportation for Border Patrol agents across California, Arizona, and Texas. Democrats, though, saying they would accept $1.6 billion for border security so long as the language makes clear the money would not be used to build a wall. But the president standing firm on his $5 billion request for the wall, tweeting, could somebody please explain to the Democrats, we need their votes, that our country loses $250 billion a year on illegal immigration, not including the terrible drug flow. Top border security, including a wall, is $25 billion. Pays for itself in 2 months. Get it done. And while there are reports of fewer migrants at local shelters in Tijuana, an official with the local migrant council there says about 3,000 migrants are unaccounted for, and that some of those could have crossed into the U.S., crossing the border there. Heather?
Yeah, that's a big part of the story, the 3,000 that are missing. Yeah. We have no idea where they are. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it, Todd. Well, liberal megadonor Tom Steyer once again calling for President Trump's impeachment.
I want to address impeachment. We can recognize that we have the most corrupt president in American history, who is a basic threat to our system and our safety and to the Constitution itself.
Well, he made those comments in South Carolina at his first of 5 scheduled town halls. Steyer is, as you would figure, considering running for president in 2020. But here's the thing. It appears liberals are actually split on impeachment. A former aide to Senator Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says that removing the president from office would ruin Democrats' chances of winning in 2020.
We're not going to be able to remove him through impeachment. The only way to remove Donald Trump is to beat him at the election box. Democrats should investigate where there's clear evidence of problems within his administration so that it makes it harder for him to get reelected in 2020. If you try to impeach him without the Republicans coming on board to actually remove him, it is a waste of time, it's a waste of political capital, and it will lead to the Democrats losing their majority.
Well, reports show Democrats are lining up to get on the House Judiciary Committee, which presides over impeachment proceedings. In the meantime, Michael Bloomberg takes a tour of Iowa with an eye towards 2020. The former New York City mayor visiting the state to promote a new documentary on climate change. But Bloomberg also took some shots at President Trump.
I do not think he is suitable for the job of being president. It's a temperament issue, and it's an inquisitiveness issue, and a willingness to look at data and look at facts. And if you do that, it's hard to understand why you would not have a more sensible position on guns and the climate.
Well, Bloomberg says he will decide whether to run for president in 2020 by February. But someone who did say he's not running, in case you care, Michael Avenatti. He announced that yesterday. So he will not run in 2020, at least for now. Well, the time now is about 26 minutes after the top of the hour. They got what they wanted, but Paris is still burning, while protesters in France say that they will keep rioting despite a freeze on gas tax hikes to support the climate change agenda. And a live look at the Russell Rotunda, where President George H.W. Bush lies in state. The nation gearing up to say their final farewells today. Presidential historian Jane Hampton Cook here to reflect on the legacy of Bush 41. Up next. Climate policies crashing and burning in France after weeks of violent protest. President Macron suspending a fuel tax and a utility price hike designed to combat global warming. Fox News correspondent Benjamin Hall has the story as protesters vow to keep doing more of this rioting.
The French government performed an embarrassing U-turn after violent protests against the new carbon tax forced it to back down. The Prime Minister admitting they would be deaf not to take notice.
I hear this anger. It is the anger of the France which works hard, and which has a difficult time making ends meet. The anger of the French people who have their back to the wall.
For the last 3 weekends, France has been gripped by the worst riots in a generation, as over 300,000 protesters took to the streets. And this weekend, police fought back, using tear gas and water cannons. 3 people have died, more than 130 have been injured, and 412 arrested. President Macron's green tax on fuel was to raise funds for renewable energy and counter global warming. But there was fury across France as people said they cared more about food on their table and warmth in their homes.
But they don't give a damn about that. What they want is to have enough money at the end of the month.
And now ambulance drivers, students, pensioners, even riot police are voicing their grievances. Similar green taxes have failed in Italy and Spain, and even environmentalists acknowledge Macron's tax was premature. As Paris cleans up, it's already bracing for another round of violence. President Macron campaigned on the promise of sweeping reforms, and he announced he would never be bullied by protesters. It now appears that's exactly what's happened. In London, Benjamin Hall, Fox News.
Well, today, the UK will release secret legal government advice on the Brexit deal. Now, this comes just one day after Prime Minister Theresa May's government was found in contempt of Parliament for the first time ever over withholding it. Right now, the Parliament is debating the terms of the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. A vote is scheduled for December 11th. A top U.S. military officer says the war in Afghanistan is at a stalemate. Lieutenant General Kenneth McKenzie warning lawmakers against withdrawing troops. The conflict has continued for 17 years. McKenzie offered no timeline for how much longer U.S. troops could be there. He warns that the country could fall to the Taliban if the U.S. pulled out now. 13 American troops have died in combat in Afghanistan just this year. The CIA director briefing lawmakers, leaving them convinced that the Saudi Crown Prince ordered Jamal Khashoggi's murder.
There's not a smoking gun, there's a smoking saw. You have to be willfully blind not to come to the conclusion that this was orchestrated and organized by people under the command of MBS, and that he was intricately involved in the demise of Mr. Khashoggi.
The Crown Prince denies knowing about the columnist's brutal murder at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in October. President Trump has cast doubt on whether the prince was involved. A federal appeals court determines that it is legal to encourage illegal immigration. Now, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, understand that, striking down a law which made it a crime, saying that it violates the First Amendment. While this particular law went into effect before President Trump took office, the Ninth Circuit has frequently ruled against those policies. President George H.W. Bush as he lies in state at the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. The boy held that pose for about a minute near the casket to say a final farewell. And here, a live look at the former president's casket. This is right now in the Russell Rotunda. Look at all those folks in there at 4:34 in the morning here on the East Coast. The nation gearing up to say goodbye to our 41st president today.
I seek the presidency to build a better America. It's that simple and that big. I'm a man who sees life in terms of missions, missions defined, and missions completed.
Missions defined and missions completed. The former president will be laid to rest in his home state of Texas tomorrow. Here now is presidential historian Jane Hampton Cook. Jane, thank you so much for joining us on this day. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So let the folks at home know, you have personal experience with the Bush family. You actually worked for President George W. Bush, correct?
That's correct. And I wouldn't be talking to you today if it weren't for President, George H.W. Bush, because the end of his presidency really launched my life in a totally different direction. I worked at Texas A&M and planned events for the university and got to plan the opening of the Bush School and the opening of the Bush International Center. So I met the senior Bushes, and that sent my husband and I into a decision to work in government. And we hopped over to Austin and started working for George W. Bush when he was governor, and then came up here when he was in the White House. So.
What are some of your favorite memories of him?
I think what really stands out to me is that he really had a simple life's philosophy. It was all about serving the public. And it was just that simple. He talked in his inaugural address about, being a good citizen and a loyal friend and a loving parent, and that a good citizen was someone who left his home and neighborhood and town better than he found it. And I think as we remember him today, it's that simple. President George H.W. Bush left his home and his nation better than he found it.
And, as a historian, you had some interesting notes, one of which was that George Bush became president exactly 200 years after George Washington.
That's right. 1789, 1989. And I think what really, comparing those two, both of them really prioritized manners and being polite. Civility was important to George Washington, and it was very important to George H.W. Bush. That's how he developed such good relationships with people, was empathy and civility. And I think that that's something that's going to be remembered about him in decades to come.
And you can see the relationship as it played out with people that he never ever met as they're lined up for hours. I think our Peter Doocy said the line yesterday at one point was 2.5 hours long to get in there to the rotunda to pay your final respects. He's also, the youngest fighter pilot for World War II and the oldest and the last of the World War II presidents.
That's right. I mean, he signed up for World War II as soon as he could. At age 18, he delayed going to college to fight. And then, of course, he was the last of our World War II presidents. We had several presidents who had served in World War II, and he was the last of them to serve as president.
And how does he tie in with another former president, John Adams?
Well, he and John Adams will forever have a linked legacy because they are both the only presidents whose sons also became president. And I think that says a lot about their character. President George H.W. Bush, he wanted his sons to serve. He said, I want you to crank it back in. We've been privileged. Let's give back. But he didn't say you have to be president. You have to be this. You have to be governor. He let it be broad and let them use their talents in a way that works for them. And I think that's why it worked. And he constantly told his sons and his daughter that he loved them. You see that in his writings. He often wrote, we love you. We love our family. And I think that really is what motivated his sons, was out of love, not pressure.
Well, our live coverage of all of this begins at 9 a.m. here on the Fox News channel with our Bret Baier and Martha MacCallum. Jane Hampton Cook, thank you so much for joining us today with your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the time now is about 20 minutes until the top of the hour, and big changes could soon be coming to the post office, what it could mean for your Amazon orders. And he preaches about the effects of climate change, but you will never guess how much Bernie Sanders just dropped on a private jet to help him crisscross the country to campaign. Well, turning now to Fox Business Alert, Wall Street shuts down for a national day of mourning in honor of President George H.W. Bush. Tracy Carrasco from our sister network, Fox Business, here with more. Good morning, Tracy.
Good morning, Heather. Yes, as the nation pauses to remember the life of our 41st president, Wall Street is closed for the day, but investors still looking over yesterday and those numbers and what happened with that major sell-off that we saw. Here are the numbers from yesterday. The Dow fell 799 points. The S&P 500 down by 90 points. The NASDAQ, the biggest loser of the bunch, down by 283 points. As you can see, all three averages down by more than 3%. Investors reacting to falling bond yields, rising fears of a recession, also some skepticism over that trade truce with China. So we do have futures trading. They are pointing slightly higher, but again, markets are closed today.
All right. So we will see what happens on, Thursday?
Yes, tomorrow.
Right. But we do know this is happening, a massive meat recall.
Yes, so this is that meat recall from back in October. Now an additional 5.1 million pounds of beef, bringing that total up to 12 million pounds of beef being recalled for concerns over Salmonella Newport. That is a strain of bacteria that can cause food poisoning. So this is very serious. The USDA definitely telling people to check their freezers to make sure they don't have any of these beef products in their freezers. It was produced between July 26th and September 7th, so those are the dates to look for. Produced by JBS USA from the JBS Tolson Processing Plant in Arizona.
So in addition to what was recalled in October.
Yep, in addition to about 6 million pounds.
Now, there were fears of this before as a result.
Show as always. Thank you. All right, welcome to Hannity. Just breaking big news out of the Mueller witch hunt. The special counsel just released its report on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. You know, the guy that served his country 33 years, 5 years in combat. Now, Mueller is recommending, after all of this time, no prison time for General Flynn. But the damage has been done. Flynn is, quote, a convicted felon, a victimless process crime based on evidence that is suspect. The FBI didn't think he lied. Now, you can't get him on an actual crime, so the old perjury trap always becomes the fallback in the Mueller camp of Democratic donors. This is how America's going to treat a military hero. This is a sad and pathetic moment for not only the special counsel, but for the country. We'll check in with Catherine Herridge. She has been reviewing as we have the full report. We will also react to this travesty of justice. And also tonight, we continue to monitor the dangerous situation at our southern border. Now, while the left actively is promoting illegal immigration with promises of open borders, sanctuary cities, and potential citizenship, on this program, we have always told you the cold, hard truth. And as we speak, there are thousands of migrants stuck south of the border in Tijuana, Mexico, camping out, squalid conditions, and now a daily stream of migrants are sneaking into the United States, and another border rush has happened. Now, coming up, we're going to do something you'll never see on any other network. We're going to break down the serious and deadly risks. The numbers are staggering as it relates to illegal immigration. Also, we have alarming video we'll share with you tonight. Look at this. Young children being dropped over the border wall by smugglers, some as little as 2 years old. And later, you won't believe what a CNN panel said about President Trump because he was paying respect to the late President George H.W. Bush. It's vile. It shouldn't shock you, coming from CNN. I'll explain in a mini monologue tonight. And last night we told you how a teacher, ruined Santa for kids in class. We'll tell you about that. Also, we have an update, plus much, much more. Sit tight, buckle up. We have a big breaking news opening monologue that we begin with. After multiple delays, it has been a full year ruined in General Flynn's life. Robert Mueller's report on the former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, 3 stars, by the way, finally out, and he has been jerked around by this witch hunt for almost an entire year. And we know now he was coerced into pleading guilty only to a process crime, lying to investigators. Now, this despite fired FBI investigator James Comey, fired Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, and even Peter Strzokor interviewed him, saying that there were 0 indications that, in fact, Flynn ever lied, actually lied when they were in charge of the investigation. We begin tonight with a report in Washington with our own Catherine Herridge. Catherine, I actually have a report that you did. If I can put my glasses on, I'll find out the date on this thing. May 4th. In it, House Intel report. Comey testified FBI agents saw no physical indications of deception by General Flynn.
That's right. That came, Sean, from testimony given to the House Intelligence Committee by the former FBI Director James Comey, as well as his deputy, Andrew McCabe. And that testimony was given several months apart. And they both reported the same thing, that agents saw no signs of deception. In other words, they didn't think Flynn was lying to them when he tried to relate his conversations and contacts with the Russian ambassador. So the question has always been, how do they get from, as McCabe said, a very poor foundation for a false statement case to a guilty plea for lying to federal investigators. I'm still going through the records now just to break it down and keep it simple. This sentencing memo from the special counsel Robert Mueller says that Flynn lied about two separate issues. One was his contacts with the Russian ambassador during the transition, and also his communications and business dealings with the Republic of Turkey. Based on his high level of cooperation with the special counsel, they are recommending the minimum on the sentencing spectrum, which would be no jail time, possibly probation. But what everyone is going to be talking about is what's called an addendum. This is the document that the special counsel has put forward that lays out how former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn has been cooperating with the special counsel. And according to the addendum, which is heavily redacted, he's provided almost 24 interviews with the special counsel. And just taking the redactions out, what we can see is that those interviews have focused on contacts between the Trump presidential campaign and Russian officials. So that's phase one. And then also in the second phase, the Trump transition team, as well as Russian officials. So we know Flynn has cooperated, provided information about both ends of the spectrum there, the campaign and then also the transition period. What I draw your attention to is these heavily redacted sections, which the special counsel is withholding, they say, because of sensitive ongoing investigations. But what they do say in one section is that Flynn has been so important to their investigations because, quote, the defendant began providing information to the government not long after the government first sought his cooperation. His early cooperation was particularly valuable because he was one of the few people with long-term and first-hand insight regarding events and issues under investigation by the special counsel. So the bottom line is the special counsel is recommending the minimum, so no jail time for the former national security advisor. You're quite right. What's detailed here are process crimes, what they call lying to federal investigators, which is a violation of 1001, typically a maximum of 5 years. But in this case, they're recommending the minimum, lying about contacts with the Russian ambassador during the transition period and lying about his work with the Republic of Turkey. What we can't know at this point is what's in those redacted sections and how it may relate to other individuals and any future criminal prosecution in the coming days or weeks, Sean.
All right, Catherine Herridge in Washington. We'll get back to her later in the program tonight. When we talk about process crime, wouldn't it be normal, because when you look at the date, December 2016, incoming National Security Advisor talking to his Russian counterpart, this is way over the line. Look, I'm going to go through this slowly. If you believe in this constitutional republic, equal justice under the law, application of our laws, you ought to be very concerned tonight and outraged. General Flynn's entire life has been put in limbo for an entire year for this. I've read the entire report. They even used the Logan Act, and it actually rarely ever used or invoked. But Hillary and the Espionage Act, he's lost his house because he couldn't afford the attorneys. He had to sell his house. His life's work, 33 years of serving his country, washed down the drain for this, reputation destroyed for this. Nobody in the FBI thought this man lied. Comey didn't think so. McCabe didn't think so. Strzok, of all people, he didn't think so, and he interviewed Lieutenant General Flynn. 33 years of service, 5 years in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. And this is the treatment, this is the thanks this country gives him. This is how we treat people. What kind of justice system is this? His house nearly faced bankruptcy, literally, and his world crashes before him and his entire family. And I would bet any amount of money that the only reason he signed this deal was, well, it's the same old system. Well, we might have to go after your son, worked with you, and, you know, then we're going to invoke the Logan Act, which nobody invokes, to go after him. So he could have made, instead of serving his country in the private sector, a lot more money. But now he has to sell his house, literally fall on the sword for his family. And don't forget, we know that they got through a lot of this information through what? We knew he was a victim of illegal surveillance, illegal unmasking, illegal leaking of raw intelligence. What about the people involved in those crimes? His rights were violated at every level. Now, this is a disgrace, and this is what we've been telling you, is a glaring example of a two-tier justice system in America. In Mueller's sentencing memo, it says, quote, senior government leaders should be held to the highest standards. Can we start with Hillary Clinton and James Comey? Because we have a long list of Democrats and Trump haters who have lied under oath before Congress and have faced no consequences. For example, longtime Clinton aide Cheryl Mills, Uma Abedin lied when they told the FBI investigators they had no knowledge of Hillary's private email, except